Hey, what's up gamers? Do you remember We Happy Few? It was all the rage in 2017. Its trailer was on everyone's lips. A terrifying city where all the inhabitants take pills to stay happy. An aesthetic reminiscent of Bioshock and a heavy mystery. We all thought it was the next big AAA title, but we were fooled by the artistic direction. Originally, it was just a small game from a small studio that had only one previous creation to its name, Contrast, which wasn't particularly groundbreaking. We Happy Few was just an indie copy of Don't Starve and The Binding of Isaac, a survivor roguelike, nothing more. To avoid breaking the hype, the developers kept quiet and decided to do the impossible, completely transform the game by adding as many narrative elements as possible, more language options and more content, all in just 1 year, convinced they could pull it off. The result was a somewhat clunky hybrid, not a disaster, but far from the hit everyone was expecting. In truth, this example almost ended well. Compared to the industrial shipwrecks you will see in this video, you'll hear stories of games that could have become classics if they had just stayed reasonable. Now take LMNO, a collaboration between EA and Spielberg, for example, a RPG where you save Eve, an alien, helping her to hide her identity and escape the government. Without any firearms, only hand-to-hand combat and parkour. This was 2005, before Mirror's Edge and Assassin's Creed. The game looked stunning, but the most ambitious aspect was Eve herself, with her complex AI and personality that would change based on the events. But EA panicked in the face of such ambition. It was about to cost a fortune, and the concept hadn't yet proven itself, so the project was abandoned. All we have left is an old demo. Sometimes stopping a game before disaster strikes isn't a bad idea. One of the most notable cases is Silent Hill, a project that was meant to be the next big thing in horror. A collaboration between Hideo Kojima, the creator of Metal Gear, and Guillermo del Toro, the director of Pan's Labyrinth. It was terrifying, anxiety-inducing, and well-paced, like this woman who would appear at the worst possible moments. Everyone was obsessed with it, and it made headlines. Even today, some consider it the best horror game of all time, but it fell apart during the storm between Kojima and his publisher, Konami. On one side, a man wanting to provoke a revolution with every game, and on the other, a company not keen on financing such extravagances. In the end, Kojima moved on to make Death Stranding, while this Silent Hill was shelved until recently. Having big names attached is no guarantee of success. For example, Daikatana, a FPS developed by John Romero, the guy behind Wolfenstein 3D, Doom and Quake. It was supposed to be released in 1997 and was being hailed as the game of the millennium. A FPS with a real story, cutscenes and voice acting, with the ability to visit different eras from ancient Greece to the samurai of the future. There were also 2 NPCs who would fight alongside you and help you solve puzzles, something unheard of at the time. But Romero wanted the ultimate game, so he made endless demands, causing the team to change the game engine multiple times, each time starting from scratch. He refused to cut any ideas to save time, creating terrible working conditions, which led to the resignation of the entire team. In the end, the game was released 3 years late, a huge disappointment. Ugly, incomprehensible, filled with bizarre mechanics, like save points being consumable items, or the fact that if the NPC died, you lost the game. It was a colossal commercial failure, costing over $30 million. But perhaps the best example is APB, a $100 million disaster. In 2005, David Jones, the man behind the first 2 GTA games, wanted to revolutionize online games. He introduced a new concept, an open world where criminals and cops clash, a giant sandbox where you could rob banks, start gang wars, and build your own faction. For players, it was nothing less than the announcement of GTA Online, 8 years before Rockstar's version. The hype was massive, the character editor was incredibly detailed, and leveling up earned you cosmetics, not stats, similar to today's battle passes. The game was said to be a massive success, so everyone invested heavily, multiplying the initial budget by 5 in just 2 years, which would ultimately lead to their downfall. Convinced that nothing could go wrong, David Jones became less meticulous, letting his team work autonomously while they did the bare minimum. Meanwhile, the commercial communication, partnerships, and economic aspects needed to be managed. When the game finally launched in 2010, the world was stunned in a bad bad way. The shooting and driving felt terrible, there were lag issues, a lack of content, and the universe wasn't coherent. It was clear the game was unfinished, yet this was a 100 million project, the most expensive game in the world at the time, and still the fourth most expensive today, right behind Red Dead Redemption 2. It was a catastrophe. The studio tried to ban press reviews, but word of mouth spread quickly. People played for a few hours and then abandoned the game. The studio was forced to shut down the servers after just 86 days, followed by a swift sale of APB to another company for 1.5 million, which made the game free to play. You can still play it today out of nostalgia or curiosity about what almost revolutionized multiplayer history. By the way, if you like industry disasters, in 96 Duke Nukem 3D came out, a politically incorrect and ultra-violent parody game with a hero obsessed with women, guns, cigars, and blowing up aliens. It was said to be one of the icons of modern FPS games. Its sequel, Duke Nukem Forever, was supposed to be released in 98, but development dragged on for 15 years. Many blame one man, George Broussard, the project director. Just 1 year after development began, he decided that their current game engine was too old, so they bought the rights for the Quake 2 engine for $500,000, a worthwhile investment after the previous game's success. Everything seemed to be on track, and they even had a trailer at E3 98. But the same year, Epic Games released the Unreal Engine, the most realistic engine of the time. For the Duke Nukem team, there was no question of making an ugly game, so they started over from scratch again, all while assuring that nothing would change. At the moment, Duke Nukem had sealed its fate. The game was already 2 years late. They said, "We'll take the time we need, but the game will be perfect." Broussard became super demanding, always wanting new features, no levels, cutscenes, multiplayer. After 3 years of development, there was still no game, just tech demos. In 2001, a spectacular new trailer was released. It was beautiful, fun, dynamic, and the game could have been one of the biggest FPS games of all time. The hype was back, but behind the scenes, it was a disaster. The development team was tiny, progress was slow, and Broussard wanted to start over again. By 2006, nearly half of the team left. Everyone was burned out, and after so much time, they had lost all perspective on the game. In 2009, after spending more than 20 million, the company was broke. Broussard tried to secure another 6 million from their publisher, Take-Two, who only offered 2.5 million. Broussard refused and decided to halt development. The Duke Nukem team was laid off, but a small group of 9 ex-employees continued working on the game until Broussard approached Gearbox. The game was finally released in 2011, and it was very average. It felt like a game from another era. The humor didn't work, the combat was bland, the level design was downright awful, with slow puzzles and driving sections. But most of all, it was a huge disappointment for fans who had been waiting for the game for 15 years. The former developers still argue on social media about who is really to blame. Not long ago, a beta version of 2001 game was found. It's almost unplayable, but a small community has formed to try to restore the project. After 25 years of waiting, we might finally get the sequel the franchise deserved. Now the nightmare of MMOs. Did you know that Overwatch was supposed to be the biggest MMO of all time? Back then it was called Project Titan, the successor to World of Warcraft, nothing less. Blizzard put in the effort, recruiting a bunch of talented developers. You would play as superheroes in a futuristic world with massive sci-fi cities, like something out of Cyberpunk, with NPCs that reacted to your past actions. It could be played in either FPS or third person, with a ton of original classes that really changed up the gameplay. For example, the Jumper, who could teleport and travel back in time. The management aspect was very detailed. You could start your own business, have a job, manage a store. It was even possible to ignore the combat aspect altogether. But it just wasn't fun. In 2014, after 6 years of development, Blizzard had lost their way. The budget had skyrocketed and there were no playable demo, just tech tests. It wasn't playable yet, but worse, it had become a mishmash of mechanics without any real purpose. It was clear that they needed to stop. That's when Jeff Kaplan decided to reuse the concept in the hope of creating something good. He kept the colorful characters, but turned the game into a competitive FPS, changing the title to Overwatch. The game went on to become a smash hit, and Titan was quietly forgotten. If you're looking for champions of of impossible promises, Kickstarter is the place to go. Take Row, for example. This game was pitched as an ultra-realistic MMO, similar to GTA RP. The idea was straightforward. Find a job, buy a house and a car, get involved in politics, or start your own business by building a gas station or a hotel. You could even choose a life of crime. It was the kind of game that people dreamed about. A world of total freedom. But after raising $170,000, Kickstarter cancelled their campaign and refunded everyone. The developers admitted in FAQ that they needed more funds to finish the game. Common story for games like this. The game Identity, for instance, a game where the entire world would be controlled by the players. It raised $190,000 on Kickstarter, followed by another $1.4 million on their website. That was 8 years ago, and today there's still nothing to show for it. Just an ugly, unplayable demo and a few videos. Then there's Dreamworld, which boldly proclaimed itself as the last game you'd ever play. An infinite open world where you could visit any universe, build anything and dig anywhere. They even claimed to have invented a system that could host millions of players on the same map at once. The developers supposedly received millions from secret investors, but it's impossible to tell if it's a scam or just sheer madness. The alpha version was nothing more than random 3D models scattered across a laggy map. The game still receives updates, but for now it's far from the promised vision. The list is long, and if there's one game that surpasses them all, it's Chronicles of Elyria. The promise was grand, a medieval MMO where your character could die of old age and pass on their skills to a new character. A world where everything was destructible and there were no NPCs. Even when you logged off, your character would continue to wander around, giving quests to other players. The project seemed solid. They even had a playable demo. They raised $1.4 million on Kickstarter, and donations continued until they reached $8 million. But 6 months before the game's release, problems began to surface. The developers had clearly underestimated the workload, struggled to recruit competent developers, and were forced to delay the project. They regularly posted long, detailed updates on their blog, so people weren't too worried. The game was delayed again and again, but the funding kept rolling in for this spectacular project. Then, in late 2019, the first gameplay video was posted on their YouTube channel, and the reaction was outrage. It looked nothing like was promised. Doubts grew that the team would ever be able to deliver the game. 6 months later, the studio announced an alpha release. Finally, players would get to test it out. They promised gameplay and even a way for players to buy land with real money. Of course, when the alpha came out, it was worse than expected. Just a clunky obstacle course. 5 days after releasing the first playable version, and after another attempt to grab more money, Jeremy Walsh, the game's director, fired everyone and halted development. Apparently, he was out of money. In 6 years and with $8 million, he failed to convince investors, failed to produce a game, and failed to apologize for his mistakes. He quickly backtracked on his decision, claiming he would continue the project alone, with help from volunteers. Meanwhile, players launched a lawsuit against him, but as long as he keeps the project going, he's safe from legal action. Today, he claims to be in debt to the tune of $500,000, and there's still no sign of the promised game. Sometimes, a game that almost changed history doesn't get the recognition it deserves. In the 90s, we almost had the perfect Jurassic Parc game, a survival horror with a massive map, cutting-edge AI, and dinosaurs with emotions. But it was released a year late, and the physics were a mess. The dinosaurs' behavior was never completed, so they just acted randomly. They even removed one of the characters' arms because they couldn't code both at the same time. Back then, no one had the hardware to run it, so it lagged, texture popped in randomly, and objects fell through the ground. It was riddled with bugs and was a critical and commercial failure, disappointing fans of the films and video games alike. Yet, with its open world and realistic physics, the game marked a turning point in FPS history. Without Jurassic Park, Trespasser, Far Cry, or Half-Life 2 might never have become what they are. Even today, there's a dedicated fan community keeping the game alive with patches, mods, and HD remakes. Trespasser's failure didn't stop Seamus Banky from getting noticed by Bill Gates, who was impressed by his technical innovations. A few years later, the man who had failed with Trepassers would go on to design the first Xbox. Maybe some games do deserve a second chance. Just look at No Man's Sky. When it was officially released, released, it was considered one of the biggest scams in the industry. But since then, it has received over 30 updates. There's now multiplayer with up to 32 players in cross-platform mode. You can build your base, tame animals, everything had been improved. The quests, the gameplay, the planet generation. It's now the game we dreamed of from the start. We're seeing something similar with Cyberpunk 2077. Given time and the right condition, Ambition's game can finally come to life. And who knows, maybe Star Citizen, with its promise to be the most advanced space simulation ever, its 550 million budget and its 10 years of development, will be the revolution it promised to be in 2012. Only time will tell. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like or subscribe if you like my content, and see you next time. Bye bye.